But I'm also, in a way, glad that I perhaps delayed this a bit because uh, we are gathered here today when India is the president of the G20. And I must say, in all these years I have done in diplomacy, in various institutions, that was the nicest way I saw international cooperation being expressed. So really, thank you. And I hope others seeing it on YouTube will learn to emulate it. It will kind of infringe your copyright a bit, but I think it's a very good practice, and I hope people do that. My focus today is obviously on the G20, and in a literal way, I think most of you know the G20 is a gathering of the 20 biggest economies of the world, and we have the privilege from last December of being having the presidency, and the obvious things about the G20 are known to all of you. People would say it's 85% of the global GDP, it's 2/3 of the world's population, it contributes 75% of the world trade, and it is something which in today's very divided, polarized, sometimes not so effective multilateral world, it is perhaps the most important international platform, and obviously to have the responsibility of chairing it is something which is a very, very big deal. But it's not just a collection of 20 nations. It's not just a presidency which comes our way like so many other organizations do. This is a very special responsibility at a very difficult moment in international relations. So I would like you to reflect on that, because what India could do, probably will do in this 1 year, will actually make a very big difference to world politics. So it's not a responsibility that we take lightly. I will later on speak a little bit about how we actually want to celebrate G20, and I'm so glad that one of the events associated with it is also at this very campus. So to understand the G20 responsibility today, I think it's important to look at the state of the world. And the state of the world, to put it very mildly, is a very difficult one. It is so for a variety of reasons, and perhaps the one which is in everybody's mind, understandably, is the conflict in Ukraine. And the conflict itself is something of very deep concern, because it is between the one involving very major nations. It has an immense implication, not just for the region, but for beyond. But what the world has also seen is the consequences of this conflict even in the last 1 year. We have seen energy prices double. We have seen food prices sometimes more than double. It's not just prices for many countries. In fact, just accessing energy and food and fertilizer. These have been among three very visible consequences of this conflict. So when we say the world is difficult, it's not it surely is not an exaggeration. If anything, it is an understatement, given what is happening in Ukraine. A second reason is, of course, the COVID pandemic. What truly was a once-in-a-century happening which has left every corner of the world profoundly affected, where there is not a society which has not seen the loss of loved ones, not a family which has been left unaffected, and the socio-economic costs of this pandemic is still so big. I think the world is absorbing it, trying to come to terms with it. But there are very practical consequences for the world from this experience. We all saw that when the COVID started in 2020, that global supply chains, trade, the supply of goods to every corner of the world started to get affected. And this has left two lasting scars on the global economy. One, whether we are over dependent on a particular geography, particular economy, particular country. And two, are our supply chains really resilient? If God forbid something else happens, do we have, if we were running the world as a business, for example, no big business in the world would ever rely on a single supply. Nobody. And the world economy has, however, slid into that position. So how do we create more resilient, reliable supply chains? How do we diversify global production? And this is not just in terms of economy, it is also in terms of health security. So there are a whole set of issues which came out of the pandemic. And so you have Ukraine today as an immediate stress on the world. You have COVID as something which has been a serious, almost obsessive concern over the last few years. But remember, the world was not in a great state before that. One of the words we all learned during COVID was, do we have a pre-existing condition? The world had a pre-existing condition before COVID. There were already other problems in the world, and the COVID and Ukraine conflict actually made them worse. For a number of countries, they were already struggling with the model of globalization. They were worrying about debt. They were worrying about terms of trade which were going up and down. So what was happening was, and in many cases, the nature of globalization, because globalization is a very pervasive phenomenon which characterizes our era. A lot of companies, for example, found that their economies were affected by dumping of goods from abroad, which was done on a scale with which they could not compete. So a world already in difficulties had to deal with these issues. And all of that, in a sense, it's like layer upon layer. Today, these multiple layers have created a degree of stress. And that is the environment in which the G20 is taking place. Now, it's not things that go off track. Sometimes there are new factors at play. And one of the factors at play is something which every person in this room is familiar with, because I see you all holding it in your hands, and that is digital. We still haven't fully appreciated how much digital has changed our lives. How much it has changed our life, because every time you look at that screen, you are learning something, but somebody else is also learning something about you. Your habits, your likes and dislikes, your demands, your preferences are all being captured even as you are looking at that screen. Now, it's not a matter of vanity, or it's not a matter of, well, somebody knows something about me. It actually is a deadly serious issue. Because if you were to look at the next generation, how will power among nations be determined? There was a time centuries ago which would be wealth, who has military power, who has most gold. There was an era where people said it was oil. Now, even this term, data is the new oil. What does it mean? It actually means that every digital transaction contributes to artificial intelligence, contributes to creation of capabilities which will actually determine what is the balance of power among nations in the coming years. So the big challenge today when it comes to anything digital is, I mean, you can put it in terms of data security, data privacy, but what it boils down to, it is this: who sees your data, who harvests your data, who monetizes your data, who utilizes your data, and what power do they have over you as a result of all of this. So if there is, just as I said, in the world of manufacturing, if there is the big concern that we need more resilient, reliable, multiple supply chains, in the world of data, in the world of digital, we need more trusted, more transparent practices. How do you ensure privacy is respected? How do we make sure that the conveniences of life do not become a vulnerability for each one of us, and particularly for our nation as a collective? Now, this is really the scenario of the world, and it is a scenario where we have both an east-west friction, tension today flowing from Ukraine. We have a north-south developing tension, which is flowing from COVID, from what were the other issues that I'm talking about. Technology is a hugely complicating factor, and these are really the issues which the G20 in some form is expected to address. Now, we have taken on the presidency at this time. Again, it's a kind of a natural thought that when you take on a responsibility, the immediate focus is, okay, how do I do this well? And when you say, how do I do this well, it means holding meetings, summits, conferences, activities of various kinds, and we will do that. In fact, we will do that. We will not only do that, we will do it very differently from how other countries have done it. It will be done in, the G20 process involves about 200 meetings, and these 200 meetings would be taking place in every state of India. We want to spread it across different regions so that this is an opportunity, really. It's an extraordinary opportunity for actually the world to see India, the full diversity of India, because the impressions of the world very often are limited to, the very sharp images of India. When the world often thinks India, they actually think Delhi, or maybe a little bit beyond Delhi. So how do we get the world to appreciate this enormous diversity that we have, the great heritage, the natural wonders that we have? So the whole idea is really do the meetings across the country, different cities, different towns, and not just for the world to see. It's also a way today when every state, multiple, there are about 55, 56 cities and towns which will be hosting G20s. It's also a way of getting India to be more, and Indians to be more aware of the world. And we have to be so, because we have to be ready for the world in an era of globalization as well. So we look at the G20 not just as an event, not just as a program. We see it as an opportunity that our people, our citizens, and especially our youth, today develop an awareness of the world, enhance an awareness, increase their interest, and for the world to have a better understanding of India at the same time. Now, having said that, it is one interesting question that when the rest of the world comes to India, what is the expectation that they have of India? And I put it to you that the expectations they have of India are actually quite exceptional. And they are exceptional for a variety of reasons, because if anybody, objective is looking at India, I think they would see in the last decade an enormous change in our country. A change which probably is most sharply reflected in the youth of the country, but a change in every way. A change in mindset, a change physically, a change in our aspirations, and I would say when we debate the G20, we need to be conscious of what is this changing expectation and why is there a change of expectation of India. And in a way, I am perhaps best placed to articulate that because my job is to go abroad and talk to people, and in that process, particularly over the last 7-8 years, I have sort of I have gathered a sense of the world's thinking about India, and that is something which today I would like to share with you. And what I did coming in here was I tried to distill this into 10 points. The 10 different expectations that the world has with India, because that is today their perception. This is how they have captured the changing India. And the first one, to my mind, is the contribution of India. Now, contribution has many senses, but I would talk about the one most literally applicable to the G20. Because remember, the G20, the mandate of the G20 is to promote economic development and growth. So, what is the contribution that the G20 thinks India would make? Now, some of you who would have seen the news today would encourage you to read a set of remarks by the managing director of the IMF, Kristalina Georgieva. She has pointed out that in what is otherwise, frankly, a fairly gloomy global economic scenario, to have a country like India with this GDP base growing at 7% and likely to continue, if not actually increase it in the coming decade, that is something about which the world has great expectations. And if I were to give it to you, in India, I would say, guys, we are growing at 7%. Everybody feels okay, good. I want you to see how the world looks at it. Kristalina Georgieva tells us 15% of the world's growth this year is going to come from India. So we are 15%, singly 15% of the solution that the G20 is looking for in terms of economic growth and development. But it isn't just, growth. The G20 is actually looking at how we have handled the COVID challenges. They note the vaccination, because remember, there are countries where there were vaccines, but not enough vaccination. There were countries which didn't have vaccines and obviously not enough vaccination. So, and getting shots in the arm, which all of us have had, looks very easy when it is done. Believe me, when you go to countries which have struggled with that problem, and when you tell them, look, they all know the population of India. When they look at our numbers and actually say, okay, everybody eligible has actually got vaccinated, for them, this is a staggering achievement. It's a staggering achievement also with the smoothness and the organization with which it is done. But the health was the most obvious. There was a time, and I remember the very early meetings. Interestingly, it was actually a G20 meeting. We had a virtual G20 meeting very soon after the COVID became a global concern. So we're talking January of 2020. And, without being personal about it, the sense of the briefing to the G20 was, if there's any place in the world which is going to go under because of COVID, it is India. That was the sentiment. And it was not the sentiment of an individual. It was sentiment actually of a set of very serious people who had studied global health and came to the conclusion that our health system, our governance system, our ability as a society would not allow us to deal with the COVID. And 3 years later, we found them to be so wrong. Even they today marvel at where we have come. and come again, not just as a health and vaccination issue. How we have managed society, how we fed people during this period, how we put money in people's bank accounts. When you talk to them of those kinds of numbers, that and a lot of this, and I really would urge you to look today at the delivery today of services in India. How much of it today is digital? That Aadhaar number has become like a magic number. That it is actually the backbone on which our daily existence today runs. For millions, for hundreds of millions of people. So if the world today has expectations, this contribution of India, it is an economic contribution, but it is an economic contribution that is underpinned by an enormous governance record, especially of a digital delivery. The second is actually the capability of India. The capability of India, including the talent of India. I spoke about digital, and you all had Mr. Narayan Murthy as a previous speaker. Our digital image is growing by leaps and bounds. It was growing initially like, India is the back office. Today, that's not the image of India anymore. It is seen today as the place, as society of innovation, of startups, of unicorns, of contract design, of manufacturing, and that, the perception among G20 economies that there is a capability and a talent today in India, and that capability and talent is actually very crucial for the progress of the global economy. That is something which has a huge impact on the rest of the world. And for me, one very interesting reflection of that is, for many years we have seen mobility of Indians, people who go out for looking for work. In the last few years, I have actually seen the reverse. Countries that come to us and say, can we have an agreement which would allow us in a legal, orderly, but efficient way to get Indian capability and talent, and we promise you, we will give them the same terms and conditions as we give to our own people. And in the last few years, it's interesting, many of the societies, many of the countries which have come to us are actually the most insular and protected societies in the world. They include Japan, they include Germany, they include Austria, they include UK, Denmark, Portugal. So this demand, again, if I were to envisage the next decade, to me, the demand for Indian talent, for Indian creativity, for Indian innovation, this is very big, and there is a whole lot of interest among G20 countries in India. The talented India, the capable India, which is what they're looking at. The third characteristic, I think, which is very, very strong in the collective thinking, is actually the generous India. The generous India, and if there is a single event which has shaped our image, and I think will shape our image for a generation, it is what we did during COVID. There's a lot I can say, but since I know this is a YouTube generation I'm talking to, I'll just give you a very, very simple solution. Just watch, it's 3 minutes. There is a foreign minister called Kamina Johnson-Smith of Jamaica. Watch her speak about vaccine mandate and how Jamaica was left to fend for itself, and that they did not even imagine that a country like India would go into that far away. This is the Caribbean that we are talking about. That, as far away as the Caribbean. And just listen to her. I can assure you, in fact, when she did it, I said it made my day. It's actually made my at least 6 months and running since then. The the fourth characteristic, I think, which will be again very much in the minds of G20, is the higher profile of India. Higher profile, not just in going up the stage and looking good. Higher profile in actually shaping global pivots. And in the last decade, if you consider the key challenges of the world, climate change, terrorism, taxation, maritime security, even food, and sometimes it starts small. This year, for example, is something called the International Year of Millets, that we are very, very strongly pushing millets, that is ragi, bajra, jowar, and we are pushing it because it is actually climate friendly, it uses very little water, it is extremely nutritious. And by the way, most of our ancestors used to eat millets before wheat came into our lives or rice came into our lives. So the push for millets actually has a serious possibility of significantly solving the world's grain demand. Because it can be grown today. The biggest constraint today to agricultural expansion is actually water. And it can be grown in a very massive way without actually significantly diverting water resources. But I cite millet, but there are other examples as well. We have been leaders of propagation of solar energy. That International Solar Alliance, which has today more than 100 members, was started by Prime Minister Narendra Modi at the Paris Climate Conference COP21. And today, if you see, there are big countries, small countries, the propagation we have done on solar, and not just propagation, we have done it backing it up by our own expanding capability in India. The fifth one I've done so far, an India that contributes, an India that is capable, an India that is generous, an India with a higher profile. It is actually a responsible India. A responsible India that within a day of an earthquake in Turkey was sending its field hospitals and its first responders out. Not again as an act of exception. I mean, we have done it, if you look in the last decade. We did it in the Nepal earthquake, we did it in the Sri Lankan mudslides, we did it in the Mozambique cyclone, we did it when there was a water crisis in the Maldives. And India today, which actually is willing to come to the help of other countries in distress. But, it's a tough world, and every country is finally judged, not just by what you do for others, but what you do for your own people. And if we are really to be a credible country, the world also watches us and says, okay, how does this country look after its people? And that too, you can see the change. You saw the change with Operation Ganga in Ukraine. You saw the change even during COVID. That during COVID, the Vande Bharat mission brought back more than 70 lakh of our citizens, and I think at least I have an interest in history. I cannot imagine in recorded history any country actually having that large a repatriation exercise. So we have today, and I'm saying this to you from practical experiences. Each of these propositions that I put before you, some minister, some president, some prime minister, some media person has actually come and spoken to me. So how did you get so quickly to Turkey? I mean, again, I would urge you, look, there are some really moving videos of our hospital in Turkey. Forget the Indians talking there. Listen to what the Turks are saying. So the image, the message of a country that looks after its people so that they are not a burden for other people, a country that is actually ready to go out to help the rest of the world, and a country, as I said, generous, that we are in the middle of our own vaccination, yet we have the largeness of heart to think about other people. That is really part of the expectation that G20 has. But every country also has its challenges, and you're also judged by the strength of your resolve. And no challenge is as sharp as a national security challenge. And in the last few years, we have been tested a long time on our western border. I think things are a little different now. I'm sure you'd agree. That a few things have happened in 2016 and 2019, and we have been tested. We are still being tested on our northern borders. And how we come through those tests, our ability to stand up. We have today the image of a country which is willing to do what it takes to defend its national security interests, which is a very, very, it is a very forbearing country. It is a very patient country. It's not a country which goes around picking fights with other people, but it is a country which will not be pushed around. It is a country which will not allow its basic bottom line to be found. But then there are also the bigger debates. Sometimes, as I said, it's a very polarized world. Your polarized world is a nice way of saying different countries try to pressurize you. They urge you, sometimes they use some pretty strong words. Now, how do you stand up for your interests? And sometimes the interests of others who may not have the same ability and strength that you do. And we are seeing that today. I began by referring to the Ukraine conflict. I think the pressures which have come with that are also a moment when frankly, our sense of independence, our sense of confidence is tested. So when we are seen as independent, when we are seen as not just only standing up for our rights, which we should and we are, but also becoming a voice of the global south. You actually had last month a consultation process as part of the G20, and this is the first time it has ever happened. We, as president of G20, at the level of Prime Minister, myself, Finance Minister, and Trade Minister, and Environment Minister, we actually, in the space of a few days, had a consultations with 125 countries. 125 countries of the global south at the minister, prime minister, president level. So that we want to go into G20 saying, look, there's a large part of the world which is not sitting on that table, but they have legitimate interests. Somebody needs to speak up for them. So India today is perceived by the rest of the G20, not only as a voice of independence and I would say self-confidence, but also actually as a voice of the global south. And that too is something which shapes the perception. Now, you can have debates, but you have real life problems as well. And, a lot of how you are seen is dependent on the ability to provide solutions. And I would highlight to you today, we are seen as a solution provider. That if the Indo-Pacific today has a lack of capability to deal with common problems, problems of maritime security, problems of connectivity, these are actually, this is a responsibility for which India has come forward. India has come forward vis-a-vis its own region. In good times, or I would say in normal times, when we have tried to promote more projects. I mean, if you actually see the change in the region in our own immediate region in the last decade, we today export and in some cases import electricity from our neighbors. We provide fuel. The roads, rails, waterways to our neighbors has all, the infrastructure has come up. But that is one kind of responsibility. There are also responsibilities which come in a crisis. And we saw that with Sri Lanka. Last year, when Sri Lanka was really struggling, the truth is, other than us, there was nobody willing to come forward to help that country. I mean, it was we who took the decision saying, because, normally when you have this kind of big crisis, everybody waits for everybody. There's some kind of security, okay, let's all do something together. If we had waited for everybody to come to do that, Sri Lanka would have gone down. And we took the decision. Prime Minister had the vision and I would say the belief that we need to not wait for other people. This is part of the solution providing, you could say, the generous side of India as well. Definitely the solution providing side of India. So where does this leave all of us? I think so far, mostly I've spoken to you about very tangible things, security, economics, trade, infrastructure. Uh, there is also something a little bigger than that. It's the world of ideas, it's the world of culture, it's the world of history, of heritage, of tradition. Today, the world sees India actually as a civilizational state. One of the few old civilizations that still continue as a nation. A civilizational state that is once again today reclaiming its place in the world. It is, some years ago, we started at the Prime Minister's initiative this International Day of Yoga. He actually proposed it in a room in New York to a few of us. And sort of everybody looked at everybody, sort of wondering, okay, what do we do with this? But he was very convinced. He actually told us, no, go ahead, do it. See, you'll be surprised how much support you will get. And it actually was a resolution which passed the United Nations unanimously. And today, when I, as someone who spent a lifetime in international relations, I try to think what other big cultural event is there which is celebrated globally. And when I say globally, I mean globally. Last year, in fact, we had, for the first time, events which started with the sunrise at the international dateline. And as the sun moved, it actually went through the entire world, coming back to the dateline. Now, the International Day of Yoga is a great reminder, actually, of what our civilization is about. Now, it's one reminder, there could be others. It could be in wellness, it could be in lifestyle. We actually have a new initiative which was announced during the visit of the UN Secretary General called Life. How do you change your lifestyle for being kinder on the environment? It's something which all of us would know naturally. We all instinctively, it's a very, very small thing I'm telling you. Instinctively, each one of you, when you leave a room, switch off the light. Go abroad. Nobody does it. The richer the country, the fingers move less. So I'm giving it to you as a very small example. That how much you can save, and this is very much, the drive which Prime Minister is making. We think when you think of climate change, we say, we should get out of coal, we should find renewables, we should move to EVs. Yes, we should do all of that. But there's an enormous saving which actually comes from changing lifestyle. And changing lifestyle in many ways, if you actually emulate traditions and practices, which for whatever reason in the name of modernity were given up over the last many decades. Sometimes when I see, I still grew up in an era when we ate every day on banana leaves, at least in my grandparents' house. Today, when I see, what they come and say, sir, you're biodegradable. I want to say, I saw it when I was, 60 years ago in my childhood. So I put it to you that in this world of ideas, culture, how do we today make that impact on the world? We have started. It's actually already visible. And I say this not just as a branding point or an image point. It's also a matter of cultural respect. That if there are traits, if there are beliefs and habits that I have, my beliefs and habits should get as much respect on the world as other people should. If there are places of faith for other cultures, why should there not be for me? If there are, if there are people who wear a kada or, wear a turban, Why should that not be respected? So how do we get a more equal, in a sense, more democratic, where everybody's culture, the actual fundamental diversity of the world is actually respected? Because it is not. I mean, the fact is, because of 2 centuries of colonialism, what is considered modern and progressive actually was equated with being Western. And today, that very big correction is taking place, and it's a correction which the rest of the G20 is actually watching in India. And not all parts of the world are completely happy with it. I in fact accept that. But I do think it's a very, very powerful development which is worthy of world attention. And finally, I think when our G20 guests come here, to me, perhaps the most powerful impression which will be made on them, and I think it's an impression which they already have started forming in their mind. It is that of the future of India. It is the future of India because when they look at the energy, the enthusiasm, the creativity in India, I had a friend in Singapore. It was quite controversial for the sharpness of what he says sometimes. He actually said, every time I go to Europe, I feel depressed. If I want to feel optimistic, I come to India. So, sometimes it's nice for other people to say it, but as someone who probably travels more than any of you, if you see me looking, any pictures of my coming back to India looking very good, it's not because I've just had a good flight. I'm actually very pleased to be back here and seeing, that sentiment in India. So once again, it's really very, I thank you for the opportunity today, because I wanted this whole G20 exercise to be seen not as a program, but as part of a responsibility, part of a bigger development, part of a big change that is happening in the world. And I am very sure that, the G20 baton will move on as it will. But I'm very sure that, not just the G20, but the rest of the world will surely remember India's presidency. So once again, yeah, sure. One of us.
So we will now, thank you, sir. Thank you very much. We will now throw the floor open for questions. We have only 10 minutes, so we're going to have to be very quick. Please start by introducing yourself, your name, and of course, the institute that you come from. Let me start with the side. Yes, gentleman in the gray jacket. If somebody could get a mic across to him.
Hello, good morning, sir, and all present here. I'm Shaurya Gori, and I'm currently pursuing Masters in International Studies at the Symbiosis School of International Studies. So my question is, the talks around UNSC reform have been going around for quite a long time. At the same time, we do not need to ignore the other agencies of UN as well. So in this context, how can the UN peacekeeping force, which itself is non-functional at now because of the over-politicization and over-politicization of the PE5, how can it be reformed, and how can UNGA take a crucial role in its reform, because it is a much more wider global south body with all the multilateral characteristics as well.
What I'd like to do, maybe I'd like to take 3 questions at a time. It will make it much easier for me.
There's one foreign student. I would like to take the question from Mr. Yasin Adam from Sudan. Are you here?
Hello, sir. Good afternoon. I'm Yasin Adam from Sudan. I'm a student of SIT. Sir, my question is there anything planned for international students in terms of job opportunities or any other special privilege because we have studied in India? Thank you.
And I would like now to take a question from a lady, if there is a yes, please.
Sir, I haven't really prepared a question, just your speech made me think about something that I've been doing in Hyderabad. I am a student from SSLA. My majors are international relations and economics. My name is Mridu. Sir, I'm a founder of a sustainable startup from Hyderabad, based out of Hyderabad, and we do so leading G20 summits and the task force and the ideas of the activities that are supposed to be taking place in the nation, such as women-led programs, sustainability, and the life mission, the P3
Question.
I'm sorry. So since we've been relating to products that are completely sustainable. For example, recycled newspaper pencils, and we're extending our products to Gobarthan project as well. I wanted to know if there's any opportunity specifically for people like us in terms of international affairs, if we could export those things.
Sure. Okay. The first question on the UN. Look, what has happened is the UN, because it was invented 77 years ago, it no longer reflects the reality of the world. It's really, it's a bit like a company. If the shareholding has changed, but the management has not, you can see the problems. So there is shareholder activism. The shareholders, the new shareholders or the additional shareholders want a fairer management, and the old guys don't want to let go. I mean, that's the bottom line. No? So this tussle is not going to be easily resolved. But what I can say, with each passing day, the pressures are building, because people do see, frankly, during COVID, the kind of, remember, COVID was a once in a century happening. Surely the most broad-based international organization should have been deeply involved in a once in a century happening. It wasn't. What happened in COVID was most countries were left to fend for themselves. Yes, there were a few initiatives like this COVAX, which was done by a combination of countries. But say if we did use COVAX to send vaccines out to a number of countries. But the bulk of what we did ourselves. We did ourselves because there was nobody else to do it with. So, but when it comes to peacekeeping, yes, there is need for, there's a big debate there, peacekeeping, how dangerous is it, what should be the mandate, while, safeguarding the peacekeepers. We're very active in that. When we had a Security Council presidency last December, we actually had a focus on how do we protect the peacekeepers. But we have a very, this, even the phrase that we use as a motto of G20, Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. It can be expressed in different ways. To me, sending vaccines abroad was vaccine Maitri is part of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. Like that, peacekeepers is part of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. Because you send people, after all, you're sending them where there is violence. That's why you need peacekeepers. They are at risk every day. And we not only have the record as a country with the largest number of peacekeeping operations, unfortunately, we also have the largest number of casualties. So this is a challenge, but it's one of those situations where it's very tough, but you have to persevere. The reform of the UN has to happen. The longer it is put off, the more the world is actually going to experience that gap, and we will persevere. On the international students, I'm very glad you asked that question, because in fact, what was it? Yesterday I was with the education minister, the day before, and we were discussing this very issue, the new education policy and the government's thinking today. We would like more international students in India. We would like to have opportunities for these international students to actually find ways of interning or working. Because this is also what we expect for our own students when we go out. We would also like to see our own educational institutions go outside India, because we do believe that they will not just promote our image, they will actually fill gaps, because there are very few countries today who have the scale of the educational experience that we do. So I hope very much that a lot of these are reflected in clear-cut policies. We are working on it, so that because we have to make visa adjustments as well for this to happen. On the startups, what you are doing. Look, I'm very pleased that you actually, while studying, are also creating and contributing in different ways. Our hope, we do not want a tightly regulated G20 that people come at the airport, we take them to the hotel, take them to the conference room, take a picture, shake hands, great, communicate, back to the airport and out. That's not the G20 we want. We want a G20 where people come. We are telling all of them, come a day before, stay 2-3 days later. We will help you with that. Go around the place where you are. I mean, if you're going to have a youth 20 out here, encourage them, let them mix around with the students, go to Pune, see what happens there, go out in the evening, leave them to figure it out for themselves. So my hope is that, not you just literally, but people like you would have a chance to make that impact on G20 delegates. Because think of it this way, those people, these 200 meetings will have a few tens of thousands of delegates. Each one of them will carry back an impression of India. That impression of India is invaluable, because if that, the kind of scenarios that I was projecting is what they take back, I assure you, you've all actually made our job that much easier. I can take another round.
There is a question from SIBM, Isha Bilore. If you're in the audience, yes, please.
Good afternoon, sir. I'm Isha from SIB. My question to you is, with the rise in bilateral and multi-state groupings in various regions, what does the future hold in terms of a shift from multilateral institutes to regional groupings to answer the global concerns? And how does India fit into this picture?
Thank you.
There's just one more question from SIOM Nasik, Kumar Prakhar. Are you in the audience? Are you here with us? All right, we'll move to the next one, SCIT MS Vaishnavi.
Good afternoon, sir. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm S. Vaishnavi from SCIT Pune, and I'm studying Information Technology Business Management. So my question to you is that recently we have discovered huge reserves of lithium, and coming to the G20 also we have several climate goals that we have to achieve. So are we going to focus solely on that, or is there a scope for exports or any other government plans?
May I just take a couple of questions from them? Yes. Shalaka?
Good afternoon, sir. Shalaka Adhikaria from International School of International Studies. What will be the role of India in terms of making rules and standards on AI and upcoming emerging technologies?
Maybe one more.
One more? Gentleman there, yes.
Okay, we'll do that.
Good afternoon, sir. So my name is Saurabh Singh and I'm from Symbiosis School of Banking and Finance. So first of all, thank you for coming here. It's a dream coming true seeing you live. it's not just for me, it's for many of us present here, youngsters look towards you. My question is, as you told, that G20 is taking place in a different manner this time. You are hosting it in different states. I read an article a few days before that Haryana is hosting a yoga sessions for all the delegates from March 1st to March 4th. So what is the outcome you're expecting by the end of G20 meet by doing the G20 meet in this manner?
So I'm going to take one more question from this side. The student from Afghanistan.
Good afternoon, sir. I'm happy to be present here and seeing you from here. Sir, this is Rahman Rahmani from Afghanistan. Sir, my question is, as you have earlier mentioned when you were speaking about the global south, Afghanistan to come and is one of the countries which is considered as that. And unfortunately, I will see Afghanistan is going through deep political and economical crisis. And as you mentioned, that the countries in global south which are voiceless, that Afghanistan is one of them too. The India in in G20 presidency will be taking stance for that. So, what is there special for Afghanistan in that regard? And one simple other question that many of our students in Afghanistan who are currently student in Indian different universities, around 2,500 students are stuck in Afghanistan since last 4 years. So about their visas, we are aware of the security challenges, but still, what are the way out for them so to get visa and come to India? Thank you.
Okay. So the first question there. Look, today, precisely because the UN isn't working so well, and the world problems have not come down, if anything, they've gone up. We have to find very creative, innovative, flexible ways of solving situations and problems. Now, sometimes, two countries or a single country, if it is very strong, can do it. But increasingly, the big problems in the world cannot be solved by one country or even two countries. It needs some kind of larger group. And that is what you are actually beginning to see. In international relations, people typically talk of bilateralism, which is between two countries, or multilateralism, where everybody is in a single room like the UN is. Now you're going to get, and in fact, I've already started getting these regional groupings. The regional groupings are good because sometimes they address a regional situation. So you may have a grouping, let us say, of in Central Asia of Central Asian countries, or in South Asia of South Asian countries, in the Bay of Bengal of the Bay of Bengal countries. So typically it's done on a regional basis, but sometimes the situation calls for more than that, And one good example is the Quad, because there is this vast region called the Indo-Pacific. So in a sense, 4 democratic countries in the Quad who have great comfort with each other, India, US, Australia, and Japan, have come together and say, okay, the 4 of us, when we pool our resources and share our skills and, develop some common working procedures, it's good for the region. There are a lot of things the 4 of us can do, which we would not be able to do by ourselves. I think that is the direction the world is going. On the climate change, lithium, look, I saw the lithium report, but I don't directly deal with that issue. I think it's a very, very preliminary stage feedback at this point of time. But your larger question, is climate change a challenge to which we must respond, or can we actually make something of it? And we believe we can. We are, for example, becoming now increasingly leaders even in ethanol blending. How do you create cleaner fuel? I have no doubt that this country will make a very effective transition to electric vehicles. I have no doubt at all. I think our companies will lead the way, and there will be that big challenge, which is how do you create affordable EV vehicles for, or you can say like the middle class consumers. I think there will be areas where we will have special capabilities and skills which will address that. I do see in terms of green technologies, India not just being an importer of green technologies and practices, but I think already in some ways we have started. I know there's a lot of pressure on us from different countries to export electric buses. That's actually already happening. On how do you set standards for emerging technologies and AI? I think it's frankly is a very complex question, one of the big questions we are going to grapple with, because especially when critical technologies are going to be very much a subject of strong competition. And AI in the digital domain today faces that polarization and the transparency trust issues. Whose AI, for what purpose are you using, in which culture is that AI developed? These are questions. So it's not a simple proposition, hey, there's a new area and what do I do to develop standards and we'll all follow the standards. I think there's going to be a very, very intense debate in all these areas, and that will be a very big subject in international relations. On the G20 outcome, what do you hope to achieve? If Haryana is getting everybody to do yoga in the morning, I hope at the very least G20 would achieve a bunch of people who go back with better yoga skills. I really hope that it would be very much more than that, because look, at this time, seriously, there are big issues the G20 is grappling with. We speak about climate. The issue is not just climate. A large part of it is finance. You can't have high climate emissions and not enough green finance to back it up. Which country doesn't have ambitions? I mean, which one of us would not like to be greener? The real problem is, where do we get the resources to make that transition? That's the real issue, and that's the issue actually where the developed world has not delivered on its promises today for multiple decades. So there are very, very, I would say, practical policy issues in different domains. These, some of it would be, some part of G20s, it will start in one G20, somebody will pick it up, develop it in the next, because it's a kind of a rotation system. But what we want to do is, wherever the situation is right, try to bring things to head. Where it isn't, at least plant the seeds. But we do want to see a more digital world. A digital world, not just in terms of companies monetizing data. We want to see digital world where public good is put at the center, where there is delivery, the kind of things that I was speaking to you about, which is actually happening in our country. When I go out, let me tell you, a lot of countries, developing countries, they're extremely interested in how do you do digital delivery. And in fact, it's very interesting. Some of them use exactly the words we use. One president of a country asked me, he said, I have this huge problem of leakage. Okay, so I said, yes, ask us. I mean, we have a great history there too. But in the eyes of the world, we have solved that problem. If you can feed 800 million people and put funds into 450 million bank accounts without leakage, the rest of the world looks at it. So I would say digital is one. Health, COVID has made everybody health conscious. Health is right up there today. And the third is green. So in this digital health green, I would say there will be a lot of debates. We have to see how much of those can actually become outcomes. And of course, we hope they will all go better with better yoga skills. But finally, Afghanistan. Look, I recognize today that the situation in Afghanistan is such that a lot of what the international community wants for Afghanistan, the international community itself will have to think it through, work towards it, push towards it, and so. Some of it are hopes which we have, and frankly worries that the world has expressed from time to time. It's obviously everybody's hope that, one day things will get better. I mean, you live here, so in many countries, I have to explain to people what is our connection with Afghanistan. I think that is very self-evident. And where the challenges for the students are concerned, we've been very open about it. There are challenges. We are still trying to work through those. We are trying to find, including whether there are some digital ways of sorting out some of those. But those are matters of concern. But again, what I do want to say is, even in these very testing conditions in Afghanistan, we have tried to do what we can. In terms of supplying wheat, in terms of supplying vaccines, because the rest of the world just turned its back on Afghanistan. Nobody gave Afghanistan vaccines to deal with some of the more emerging situations. May have happened in the early days of the COVID, and especially of medicines. So it is something which is very much.
Thank you so much, sir. We weren't exaggerating when you said that you're truly a rock star. We put your pat on the back with no questions. Thank you very much.
Well, a very good morning. It's not that early, but it's really wonderful to be back here. And I think Justin and Samir, I need to thank you both for making this event possible. Senator, thank you very much for your warm words. What I thought would be the most useful thing that I could do for all of you is really speak a little bit about how we see the relationship. But more important, perhaps share with you how I see, the Indian landscape changing, and why that is relevant for you. And when I say I see the Indian landscape changing, in a way, I bring multiple perspectives to bear. The objectivity of someone who spent a lot of time outside his own country, who keeps looking back at it, and who in a way is a sort of marketing department of the country for 40 years. So you have to know your product well to market it effectively outside. And then a brief corporate education, which was, very, very useful, very brief, unfortunately. And 4 years as a practicing politician, and believe me, the speed of education there is even faster. And really, when you go around, I would say, to me, the real discovery of being a politician is how much time you spend really on the road. I mean, on the street, and the kind of things you pick up there, and the impact of changes, which otherwise you look at it much more theoretically if you're just living in a capital city. But let me kind of dial back a bit, look at the relationship itself. And I think I would very much echo what the Senator said, which is today's world, I think the state of the world creates a very compelling case for India and Australia to do more with each other. For quite a few years now, for more than a decade, I think we can see the direction the world is going in. It's in transition now. That's a very nice word, which pretty much describes anything at any time. But the bottom line is the sense of stability, the factors of permanence in our calculation that we had for many decades have in the last decade, there have been question marks, and there have been question marks. I mean, we can debate it's a good thing or a bad thing, but it doesn't matter. It's happening. And it's necessary for countries like India and Australia here to work more closely to shape the direction in which the world is going. But there's a much more immediate context, and the context is especially that of the last 3 years. There was already this transition going on, and there were, I think, trade concerns, there were financial concerns, and then came the COVID. and the impact of the COVID has been devastating on the world economy. Perhaps we in India and Australia feel it much less. As someone who travels a fair amount to other parts of the world, when we